Hi, I'm Tina. I'm the mediator at Florida Divorce Coaching and Mediation. And the idea behind this virtual consult is to give you information on what our mediation services entail, whether it's a good fit for you, how it might compare to some of the other options you might be considering, and try to answer some of the common questions that we see when we meet with people face to face. So, at a high level, obviously, you have a lot of different ways that you can get divorced. What I kind of like to tell people is ultimately, you can get from point A to point B, which is, the initial decision to divorce, and then the kind of final judgment when the judge signs off on it in a multitude of different ways. But at the end of the day, that process that you choose is really going to be what determines the next 30, 40, 50 years of your life, right? Because the decisions you make right now are going to directly impact the process and the outcome, especially for those people who have minor children. It's going to affect their future too. And so you're not just looking at how does this impact yourself, you're looking at how does this impact my children. And the same goes, by the way, for those people who have adult children. Maybe your children just graduated recently. Maybe you technically don't have minors, but they're still dependent, right? Um, and so what we want to look at is, I like to start my consultations by kind of telling people what the landscape is, right? What's the easiest, most affordable, lowest intervention way to get divorced, and then what is the most litigious, most expensive way to do it, and where does my process fit in, right? So, um, on the one side of it, you could get divorced with no professional help, right? A DIY divorce, people do it all the time. It's called a kitchen table divorce, in the industry. And you sit down at your kitchen table, you figure everything out, you file it yourselves, you appear in court with the judge, and you get divorced. I will say when there's minor children involved, it's generally harder for people to do that route just because it feels pretty overwhelming to try to figure out a parenting plan and child support guidelines and make sure you have all the right documents filed with the court so that it doesn't get kicked back or rejected. And so it just can feel like too much, especially when you're already potentially moving or trying to manage the things your kids are going through. There's just like so many other things happening that the idea of doing it yourselves just feels like totally out of reach. And then on the flip side of that, there's the litigation model, right? And that's what a lot of times people think about when it comes to divorce, this kind of like nasty process that takes years and years and costs a ton of money, tens, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 more sometimes to get divorced. And, in that model, you both generally have a lawyer on retainer. You are essentially heading towards a court date unless you settle first. Um, and it can be a very difficult process for people because there's often a lot of lag time between meetings. There's kind of you don't feel like you're really in control of the process. There's just a ton of billable hours happening, in between, and it can get financially very overwhelming for people on top of the emotional overwhelm and decision-making overwhelm of the whole process. Um, so, generally speaking, it's not a great option to hand over decision making to a stranger, even if they are a judge, right, to decide everything about your family. But even if you are able to settle beforehand, often the ramifications of a litigated divorce last decades or a lifetime. It's really hard to come back from that, especially for parents who now still have to co-parent every single day, every single week with one another for potentially, sometimes I work with people who have infants, 18 years, and by the way, it doesn't stop when they're 18. I have teenagers and they very much still need you after that. So, you have a lot of years ahead where you've got to coexist. And so the better you can get through this process, the more unscathed you can get through this, both financially and emotionally, the better off both people are going to be, and especially the better off your children are going to be. And that's really where kids first divorce mediation was born from, right? Is this idea that we need to create a better process for parents who are trying to unravel a life together but still kind of keep some sort of collaboration for the children. And that traditional litigated framework is just not really, from my perspective, the most productive for parents who are trying to get along and actually be amicable. That's kind of that end of it. And then in between, we have collaborative divorce, which can be a wonderful process for people. It involves having two attorneys and a mental health neutral, financial neutral. I'm very involved in that community here in Central Florida. It is a great process. The reality is, though, that it can be financially difficult for some people because it is fairly expensive process, just realistically, because you do have four professionals involved, and sometimes it's not really what people are necessarily looking for, depending what their goals are and what their needs are. But sometimes it definitely can be the best process. So it just really depends. What I do with mediation, it falls kind of somewhere in that middle area as well. Basically, the idea behind Kids First Mediation is that it is a guided, structured process through the steps of divorce, through the business of divorce, if we want to, call it that, because that's really what it is. We have to get together certain agreements and, separate essentially the financial pieces of your lives together. And then also, of course, deal with the plan on how you're going to parent your children in two households. And so that is all, a series of meetings that need to take place to figure out a series of decisions, right? So the way I like to structure my process is that I like to break it up. Initially, you guys would each do a 30-minute intake session with me one on one so that I can get to know you, get to know what your values are, what the priorities are. What do you think are going to be the sticking points? Where do you think, gosh, I don't know if we're going to get there on this particular issue, but, it helps me as a mediator to kind of know some of that up front so that I know how to manage through certain conversations or challenges when they arise. Um, and then from there, also, you will then set up your first joint session. So once the intake sessions are done, we meet jointly. I generally start with an hour for the first session. Usually, my meetings are an hour a week because I find that's easiest for people from a scheduling standpoint. It's easiest for people from an emotional standpoint, just keeping yourself calm and level-headed. Once we push past 2 hours, it just starts to get tougher for clients to stay in that productive, rational headspace, just because it's information overload and it's sometimes emotional overload. And so I really like to try to set you up for success and keep it short and sweet, right? In the sessions, in the length of time. And what we do is essentially I screen share and we walk through the parenting plan, you know, step by step. And I really try to guide you through to make sure that it doesn't feel like you have to make a million decisions at once, but we're just talking through all the different considerations that we need to have. And then same goes, of course, when we get to the marital settlement agreement as well, which is your financial agreement. And so we'll do the same thing there. I have a template. We work through it together, screen share, step by step. So it's not, everything at once, right? And I like to break it up again in that weekly cadence so that you have the space and time to go get more information if you need, to go, talk to your financial advisor, your CPA, to get input from the mortgage people, or, talk to a realtor or get an appraisal, or, if you want to have a consult with a lawyer, that's always on the table. I have many lawyers who work hourly with my clients, as needed, right? If they need advice on particular issues or they want to have it reviewed at the end, that is always on the table. So breaking it up like that, I think, really gives us a good structure to, fill in all those holes as we come to them. And, my approach to mediation is very much I call it kind of like the old test taking philosophy, right? Like back in the day when you took your SATs or whatever, and they tell you to, hey, if you don't know the answer to something, you skip it, circle it, and come back. That's my approach. So if we hit a topic where we just are not aligned, circle it, let's come back, right? Because I don't want us to get bogged down on the things we don't agree on, because we can go down a massive rabbit hole if we want to go there with that. But instead, I want to focus on what we can agree on, and then, see where we end up at the end, because sometimes you'd be surprised some of those issues resolve themselves, with time or with other conversations that we have. Sometimes we find solutions to those issues. And so I like to really just focus on powering through whatever we can, with the ultimate goal of hopefully reaching full agreement, right? as part of my process, we'll run child support guidelines. We'll talk through alimony if that's something that's important to both of you. Generally speaking, like that first joint meeting, we're going to go through the financial affidavit at a high level. I'm just going to kind of show you what I need from you. And then the checklist that I'll send you, the financial checklist. So we'll talk through all that at the beginning. That way, you know exactly what I need and you're not, feeling like overwhelmed with what am I supposed to give you. I try to really make sure that you feel supported through the process and you're not just kind of like waiting around wondering what's next. And keeping that weekly cadence really helps with that too, because we're just constantly kind of, in touch with one another in that sense as well. And then, of course, sometimes there's circumstances where maybe it doesn't make sense for us to meet together, the three of us. So, in those situations, I can certainly, do separate virtual rooms or, separate meetings if needed. That's something that you can, talk to me about. But I do generally try to keep parents together whenever I possibly can for multiple reasons. Number one, it just helps the two of you to have, at best, friendly conversations and at least like civil neutral conversations, which helps over time to just kind of reestablish more of that professional tone in your interactions and help you later when you're co-parenting, have a bit more of a framework to go off of. And then also it's just more efficient. I mean, if I have to go in two different rooms and re-explain the same thing, of course it's going to take more time, right? And time is money. And my whole approach and why I'm in this business is to help people do divorce in a more affordable way, in a more low conflict way. And so I certainly don't want to be putting you guys in a position where I'm just having to charge more because of the structure that I created. So that's not generally my first approach, but if we need to, when we get to the more high touch topics, sometimes I will separate you guys, just if I feel like we're going to be more productive, which does sometimes happen. And so those are things that I will do as it makes sense to me as a mediator to do those. But ultimately, we're aiming for full agreement, right? That's hopefully what we end up with, and most of the time it is. And if that happens, then I can also help you with preparing all the court forms for you for a flat fee. And then I partner with an attorney, and he charges a flat fee to go ahead and file it through the attorney e-filing portal. And generally, when we do that, we're able to go ahead and avoid having any kind of court hearing. That is such a more, I think, dignified way to go through the process of divorce. It feels a lot less litigious, of course, because we're not, in a court situation battling each other or even on opposing sides. It's really focused on just getting through what needs to be decided on, preparing the paperwork, getting it filed, and moving forward to the next chapter. And that's really my approach and the way I try to do things. And I always tell people that, don't underestimate the importance of the professionals that you involve in your divorce, because ultimately those people are going to really guide the entire mindset and trajectory of this process and this season of your life. So, for me, what I stand for is to try to ultimately reduce trauma for your children, make it a less stressful process, make it a transparent process, make both people feel like they're heard, and help you to kind of overcome some of those obstacles that you may have in reaching agreements on your own. Being a rational, kind of neutral person who can help keep the tone at a 5 instead of a 10, right? And ultimately just keeping your kids first. That's the whole point. That's why it's called Kids First Mediation, right? That's the goal. I keep a running list of all the first names of all the kids that whose parents I've worked with. And that's something I'm really proud of. And the way I look at it, it's a generational impact, the work that I do. So your kids will never know me, but the work I do with you is going to directly impact their life and their future. And so, if you think that this sounds like a better way to divorce than maybe what else you thought was out there, I would absolutely love to work with you. I think there's a huge opportunity in choosing the right process. And I'm really proud of the process that I've created. And I sincerely, hope to have the chance to work with you. And if you think this is something you want to get more information on, please just click the button here to get more information, and I'll get that over to you by email, and then we can go from there. But in any case, I wish you the absolute best in this next stage of your life. And like I said, I hope to work with you and help you through that process.